I canceled my son's birthday and canceled his vacation, and now told him to cancel his Halloween party in favor of his sister and told him to be more understanding. Now, my entitled son claims we aren't his family and will go NC in 2 years. When our daughter was 7, there was an issue at school with another kid. It didn't go on for that long, a couple of weeks maybe, but it was enough that she changed in a way I still don't think she's fully come back from. It wasn't constant physical stuff or anything like that, but it was targeted and mean in a way kids can be, especially about appearance. She started picking at herself after that, asking questions about how she looked that she never asked before, and crying over small things that didn't used to matter. At the time, it felt like something fragile had been knocked loose. We didn't sit down and make some big parenting decision. It was smaller than that. It started with things that felt obvious. Let her choose dinner because she wasn't eating much. Let her pick the movie because she kept withdrawing. Sit closer to her. Check in more. Keep things calm. I remember one night pretty clearly. Our son had asked for a specific restaurant that week. We'd said yes earlier. That night she wouldn't come downstairs, and when I went up she said she didn't want to go anywhere because she didn't want people looking at her. So I came back down and told him we'd just order in and let her pick. He didn't argue. He just said okay. I remember thinking that was a good sign, like he understood what was going on, and that's kind of how a lot of those decisions went. It wasn't one big moment where we decided she comes first. It was a series of small adjustments that felt temporary. Each one made sense on its own. The birthday thing is probably where it stopped being small. We'd already talked about his party. He wanted a group of friends over, nothing huge, just a few people and staying up late. We had said yes. It was planned enough that he had already mentioned it to people. A few days before, she had a rough stretch again. Not tied to anything new, just one of those dips where everything seemed to hit her at once. My husband said maybe getting out of the house would help. I agreed. A change of environment. Something different. We told him we were going to do a family trip instead that weekend. I remember how I explained it because I tried to keep it calm. I told him this would be better for all of us, that we could still do something smaller for him another time. I said she needed something to look forward to, and this might help pull her out of it. He asked where we were going. I told him she would pick. That part I probably didn't need to say out loud like that, but at the time I wasn't thinking in those terms. I was thinking about giving her something she could control. He didn't get upset in the way I expected. He just kind of went quiet and said he wouldn't like wherever she picked. Not in a dramatic way, just matter of fact. I told him it was only a couple of days. We went. He was polite the whole time. That almost made it easier to believe we hadn't done anything that bad. I did tell him we'd do something with his friends later. I meant it when I said it. It just never actually happened. There was always something. School is starting, schedules are not lining up, and she is having a rough day again. It didn't feel like we were ignoring it. It felt like we were postponing it. There were a few other smaller things around that time that I didn't think much about then, but I can list them now because he brought them up months later and I didn't even remember some of them at first. He had a friend's sleepover he was supposed to go to, and she had a bad night and didn't want him to leave. We asked him to stay. He had a weekend soccer thing, and she had a meltdown that morning about going out, so my husband stayed home with her, and I asked him if he was okay skipping it so we didn't split up the day more than it already was. There was a time he had plans after school, and she texted me saying she didn't want to be home alone, so I called him and told him to come straight home. Individually, none of those felt extreme. But I can see how they probably don't feel individual from his side. The situation with my husband's mother made everything worse. She said something in front of both kids about how she had put aside money for her grandsons, and when our daughter asked about it, she said something about boys carrying things forward and girls leaving anyway. It wasn't said gently. I remember my daughter just staring at her, not even crying right away. That was worse. My husband cut contact after that, completely. There wasn't a long discussion about it. After that, I think both of us became even more focused on making sure she never felt less than in this house. But the way that showed up wasn't through conversations or reassurance as much as it was through decisions. Let her pick. Let her have the final say. Don't let her feel overridden. I don't think we said those rules out loud either, but we followed them pretty consistently. There were times our son pushed back. He would say things like he already had plans, or he'd ask why he had to change something again. And I would explain it. I'd say she was having a hard time, that this wouldn't be forever, that we'd make it up to him. There were a couple of times he didn't agree. Actually said no. Those were harder. I didn't yell at him, but I did insist. I'd say we needed him to be flexible, that this was important right now. My husband handled it the same way. We were very aligned on that. We didn't frame it as punishment. It was always framed as helping. I think that's part of why it didn't register as something we needed to correct. If I'm being honest, there was also this underlying thought I didn't really question at the time, which is that he could handle it. He wasn't the one falling apart. He wasn't the one refusing to go to school or crying over how he looked. He had friends, he made plans, he seemed steady. So when there was a choice, it didn't feel like choosing one child over the other. It felt like adjusting around the one who needed more in that moment. I don't think I noticed when that moment stopped being temporary. A few months ago, he sat us down and said he felt like he didn't matter as much in this family. He said it felt like everything revolved around his sister, and he was just expected to go along with it. He brought up the birthday, the canceled plans. Things I had honestly forgotten or didn't realize stood out that much. He said he felt like it wasn't really his family, more like hers, and he was just there. That part I didn't know how to respond to properly. I told him that wasn't true, that we loved him the same, that we were just trying to help his sister through something difficult. He said he understood that, but it didn't change how it felt. We told him we would do better. We said we'd look into getting her a different therapist because maybe what we were doing wasn't enough or wasn't working the way we thought. I said we would make more of an effort to not cancel his plans and to follow through when we promised something, and at the time, I believed that too. I didn't think we were lying to him. I thought we were resetting things. But then last week happened. He had plans for a Halloween party with his friends. He'd been talking about it for a while. He had everything figured out, rides, timing, all of it. Our daughter had plans too, but something happened with her friends. There was a panic attack involved, and from what I understand, they handled it badly, made fun of her afterwards, and then the plans fell apart completely. She was very upset. Not just disappointed, but back in that place where everything feels like confirmation of how she sees herself. She asked if we could go somewhere for the weekend instead. Just us. My husband and I looked at each other, and it didn't feel like a big decision in that moment. It felt like the same kind of decision we've been making for a while. We talked to him and asked if he could cancel his plans so we could go as a family. I did try to acknowledge it. I told him I knew we had said we'd do better, that this wasn't ideal, that we would make it up to him. But even as I was saying it, I could hear how similar it sounded to things I'd said before. He didn't argue the way he used to. He just said fine at first, and then when we tried to keep talking about it, he cut it off and said not to bother making it up to him, that he didn't believe that anymore. And then he said he'd just do what we wanted for the next 2 years, and then he was done. He didn't raise his voice. It didn't sound like something he said to hurt us. It sounded like something he had already decided. We tried to talk to him after that, and he just shut it down. Said there was nothing to talk about. I'm not sure when it shifted from him being upset about specific things to him planning to leave like that. That's the part I can't quite line up in my head yet. A couple of days later, things don't feel explosive in the house. They feel off in a quieter way. He's still doing what we asked. That's almost worse. He's not pushing back about the trip. He's not bringing it up again. He's just going along with it in a way that doesn't feel like understanding anymore. I keep thinking about the times he argued before, and I didn't like it then, but now I kind of wish he would again. Because this feels like something else. Opinions. Opinion 1. You keep describing this like you made a bunch of isolated mercy calls, but that's not really what happened. You built a whole family routine around one child's distress and quietly assigned the other child the role of the one who can take it. That's the part I think you're still minimizing. Your daughter absolutely needed support after the bullying and after that awful comment from the grandmother. No question. That stuff can mess a kid up badly. But your support was supposed to look like protection, therapy, stability, better coping, and better adults around her. Instead, a lot of it turned into giving her decision-making power over shared family life and repeatedly cashing out your son's time, birthday, plans, and social life to fund that. That is not the same thing. And I don't even think your daughter is the main problem here, honestly. I think you and your husband got emotionally lazy in a very specific way. Not lazy in the sense of not caring, but lazy in the sense that once you found a system that reduced her immediate distress, you kept using it. Your son being disappointed was manageable. Her being upset felt urgent. So every time there was a choice, you went with a child whose pain made you more nervous. Parents do that all the time and then act shocked years later when the quieter kid is done with them. Also, your son didn't just lose events, he lost sovereignty. That's what I think you're not fully hearing. It wasn't just the trip instead of the birthday party or cancel Halloween. It was years of being told his plans were conditional, his yes didn't matter, and his no definitely didn't matter. That changes how a kid sees his place in the house. He stopped being a family member and became emotional backup equipment. And now you're disturbed because he said he'll leave in 2 years. I believe you. But he didn't decide that in one sentence. That decision got built every time you promised to make it up to him and then didn't. Every broken promise teaches the same lesson harder. Your daughter needs real help that does not come at your son's expense. Your son needs parents who understand that he handled it better is not proof he was less harmed. It usually means he learned there was no point showing hurt because the answer was already decided. You and your husband need to stop talking like this is a communication problem. It's a pattern problem. He communicated, you heard him, then you repeated the exact same thing. From his perspective, that probably felt like being told, very politely, to go duck himself. Another person thinks, I'm going to come at this a little differently because I don't think the real headline is, you picked your daughter. I think the real headline is that you and your husband started parenting from fear and never stopped. Everything in your post reads like two parents trying to prevent another crash. Bullying happened. Then the grandmother said some disgusting sexist shit. Your daughter's confidence tanked, and after that, you both started scanning for anything that might set her off again. Once that becomes the household mindset, all the decisions start making sense to you. Of course you let her pick dinner. Of course you changed plans. Of course you canceled things. You weren't thinking in terms of fairness. You were thinking in terms of damage control. The problem is fear-based parenting makes you really stupid about slow damage. You get hyper-focused on the kid who might break right now, and you stop seeing the quieter kid bleeding out over time. That's your son. And his wound isn't just, they canceled my stuff. It's more existential than that. He's basically saying, I do not experience this home as a place where my wants, plans, or emotional life carry equal weight. That's not bratty. That's devastating, especially because he didn't get there through one giant betrayal. He got there by pattern recognition. Kids are insanely good at pattern recognition, sometimes better than adults because they don't have all the excuses cluttering the view. I also think there's a decent chance your daughter has been harmed by this setup too, even if she benefited from it in the short term. Because when parents over-accommodate one child for years, that child can end up even more fragile. Not because they're weak, but because the whole environment starts confirming that ordinary disappointment is too dangerous for them. So now you may have one kid who learned his feelings won't be prioritized, and another who learned the family has to rearrange itself when she's in pain. That's a brutal dynamic to grow up inside for both of them, and your husband being on the same page doesn't make this better. It makes it worse, honestly. It means your son had no parent to triangulate towards, no safer place to bring the complaint. No one is saying, wait, hang on, this is becoming a pattern. He got a united front every time. That kind of thing can make a teenager feel crazy because there's no crack in the system anywhere. Just two calm adults explaining why his loss is necessary again. The line about doing what you want for 2 more years is bad, yeah. But the really bad part is that he's become strategic. He's no longer trying to be understood. He's managing his exit. That's a different stage. Once a kid starts planning emotional distance before they even have physical independence, the family is in deep shit. So, no, I don't think you're monsters. I think you're scared parents who made one understandable adjustment and then turned it into a whole operating philosophy. And now the child you thought was fine is telling you he's not fine, he's just finished. That's a hell of a lot harder to fix than a canceled Halloween party. Continuation. I'm his mom, and I know how the last thing I said made it sound like we just keep doing the same thing and expecting a different reaction. I've been thinking about that a lot, and I don't think it's as simple as us not caring or not hearing him. I do hear him. I just don't agree with everything he's saying about it. That's probably the part people won't like, but I'm not going to pretend I suddenly think we handled everything wrong, because I don't. I think some things went too far, yes, but I don't think the entire approach was wrong. What I keep coming back to is that he keeps framing this like we chose her over him in some kind of clear, intentional way, like we decided she matters more. That's not how it felt at all. It felt like one child was struggling in a way that could spiral, and the other wasn't. And I still don't think that part is incorrect. That doesn't mean he didn't get hurt. I can see now that he did. But I think he's ignoring the difference in what they were dealing with. That's where we keep getting stuck when we try to talk. A couple of days after everything, I tried to talk to him again. Not in a big sit-down way, just while he was in his room. I told him I wasn't trying to argue, I just wanted him to understand where we were coming from. He didn't say much, just kind of stood there listening but not really engaging. I told him that what happened with his sister wasn't small, that it changed how she sees herself, that even now, something like what happened with her friends can undo weeks of progress. He didn't interrupt, but I could tell he wasn't agreeing either. I said something like, I know it hasn't been fair all the time, but sometimes things can't be equal when one person is more fragile. I tried to say it carefully, but that was the word I used, fragile. He reacted to that more than anything else I'd said, not loudly, just a shift. He looked at me differently for a second, and then he said, so I'm just the one who has to deal with it then. I said no, that's not what I meant. I said we're trying to balance things, but sometimes we need him to adjust more because he can. That's when he stopped the conversation. He just said, yeah, I know, and walked out. It didn't sound like understanding. It sounded like confirmation. We did follow through on the therapist part. We found someone new for our daughter, someone who focuses more on anxiety and self-esteem specifically. We told both kids about it, explaining that we're trying to make sure she's getting the right kind of help so things can stabilize more. I thought that would matter to him, that it would show we were actually trying to change something, not just repeating the same pattern. He didn't really react. We asked if he'd be open to joining a session at some point, just to talk about how things had been feeling in the house. He said no. I tried to explain that it could help, that it wasn't about blaming him or putting him on the spot, that it might make things easier for all of us if we could talk in that kind of setting. He said, "I'm good," and that was it. It's hard to explain how frustrating that is without it sounding like I'm blaming him for not fixing things. I'm not expecting him to fix it. But at the same time, if he won't engage at all, I don't know how we're supposed to move forward. My husband tried talking to him separately a few nights later. He approached it the way he usually does, calm and direct, not emotional. He told him, "We know things haven't felt fair, but we're trying to handle a situation that's more complicated than just making everything equal all the time." He said we need him to meet us halfway. Our son didn't argue with him either. From what my husband told me, he just listened, then said something like, "I already know what you're going to say." My husband asked him what that meant. He said that it's temporary and you'll fix it later. And then he didn't say anything else. My husband told me it felt like talking to someone who had already decided the conversation didn't matter. That's exactly how it feels from my side, too. The house itself hasn't been tense in the way you'd expect. There's no constant fighting or slammed doors or anything like that. If anything, it's quieter. Too quiet. He still does what we ask. If we tell him dinner's ready, he comes. If we ask him to be home at a certain time, he is. He hasn't broken any rules or acted out. But he's not really here in the way he used to be. He doesn't sit around and talk. He doesn't tell us about his friends or what's going on at school unless we ask directly, and even then it's short answers. He spends more time in his room, but not in an obvious, dramatic way. It's subtle enough that if I weren't paying attention, I might tell myself it's just normal teenage behavior. And I did tell myself that at first. I actually said that to my husband one night, that maybe we're overthinking it and this is just him getting older, wanting more space. But then I remembered what he said. About 2 years, about leaving. That doesn't feel like normal distance. That feels like something planned. There was something else that happened that I haven't been able to get out of my head. I wasn't trying to snoop. I want to be clear about that. I checked his phone as a routine check. I didn't read through everything. I just saw enough before I realized what I was doing. It was a conversation with one of his friends. He was talking about us. Not angrily. That's the thing. It wasn't angry. It was very settled. He said something like he's just waiting it out, that it's easier to not fight about anything anymore because nothing changes, that he doesn't really bother making plans around us because they get canceled anyway, that he feels like he lives in someone else's schedule. There was a line about how once he leaves, he's probably not coming back except for holidays, and even that depends. I put the phone down after that. I didn't bring it up to him. I don't think that would have gone anywhere good. But it confirmed that what he said to us wasn't just something he said in the moment. He's thought about it. At the same time, our daughter is still struggling. The new therapist is helping, I think. It's early, but she seems a little more stable, day to day. Not fixed, but not as volatile. But situations like what happened with her friends still hit hard. She's been more attached to us lately, wanting to spend time together, asking what we're doing on weekends, checking in more, and I can see how that overlaps with everything else. There was a moment a few days ago where she asked if we could all watch a movie together that night. Nothing big, just at home. He had been planning to go out. I hesitated. I actually stopped myself from immediately saying yes to her, and she noticed that. She asked if something was wrong. I said no, I was just thinking. My husband looked at me, and I could tell he was waiting to see what I'd do. In the end, I told her we could do it, but maybe another night if he already had plans. She got quiet, not upset, just withdrawn, and I felt that same pull again. That feeling like if I push her too far, she'll slide back. So I told him maybe he could stay just this one time. Even as I was saying it, I knew how it sounded. He didn't argue. He just said, "I'll go another night," and went to his room. We watched the movie. She seemed better afterwards. But the whole time, I kept thinking about how easily I slipped back into the same pattern. I don't think we're ignoring him. I think we're dealing with two different kinds of needs, and one of them feels more immediate. But I'm starting to see that from his side, immediates doesn't matter. What matters is that it keeps happening. And I don't know how to balance that without feeling like I'm risking one of them. Because when I think about pulling back from accommodating her, I worry about what that does to her. And when I think about continuing like this, I can see what it's already doing to him. My husband still thinks we can level it out over time, that once she's more stable, things will naturally shift back, and we can repair things with him. I want to believe that. I just don't know if he's going to be here, emotionally, by the time that happens. Analysis. What makes this situation uncomfortable isn't just that the parents favored one child, it's how they did it and how long they convinced themselves it wasn't actually favoritism. This isn't the loud, obvious kind where one kid gets praise and the other gets ignored. This is the quieter version that looks like care on the surface. That's why it's harder to call out and easier to defend. The parents didn't wake up and decide their son mattered less. They made a series of decisions that all sounded reasonable in isolation and then never stopped making them. That's the whole problem. They didn't treat the daughter's situation like something to address. They treated it like something to reorganize the entire household around. And once that became normal, everything else started bending to it without being questioned. Meals, plans, birthdays, social lives, even the son's ability to say no. All of it became flexible as long as it kept the daughter stable. And here's where people tend to get soft about it, but they shouldn't. Protecting a child does not require turning another child into collateral damage. Those are two different things. The parents blurred that line over and over again. The mother keeps leaning on this idea that one child was more fragile. That word does a lot of work for her. It lets her frame the situation like it was about urgency, not priority. Like she was responding to need, not creating imbalance. But from the outside, it doesn't really matter what label she uses. The outcome is the same. One kid's distress dictated the household. The other kid's life got rearranged around it. And the son figured that out early. What's interesting is that he didn't react like a stereotypical angry teenager. He didn't explode. He didn't rebel in obvious ways. He adapted. He complied. He went along with it. And that's exactly why the parents kept going. Because compliance is easy to misread. When a kid doesn't fight back, parents love to interpret that as understanding or maturity. It's convenient. It confirms the decision they already made. But a lot of the time, it's not maturity, it's resignation. It's a kid realizing that pushing back doesn't change anything, so why bother? That's what happened here. Every time they canceled something, every time they said, "We'll make it up to you," and every time they asked him to adjust, they were teaching him something very specific. Your wants are negotiable, your plans are temporary, and your no doesn't hold weight if it conflicts with her needs. You don't undo that with a better therapist or a couple of conversations, and the mother still hasn't fully accepted that. She keeps circling back to, "We hear him and we're trying." But hearing someone and changing behavior are not the same thing. They heard him months ago when he told them he felt less important. Then the next real test came, and they did the exact same thing again. At that point, from his perspective, the conversation is over. That's why his reaction shifted. Earlier, he explained, he listed things. He tried to be understood. Now he doesn't bother. He just states the outcome. 2 more years, and he's gone. That's not teenage dramatics. That's a decision, and people underestimate how big that shift is. Once a kid stops trying to change your behavior and starts planning around it instead, you're already late. He's not engaging because he doesn't think engagement has any effect. That's not an attitude, that's learned futility. The mother keeps focusing on the tone of the house being quiet, like that's a good sign or at least a neutral one. It's not. Quiet in this context is not peace, it's disengagement. The son is still following rules, still showing up to dinner, still technically participating, but he's not invested. He's not sharing. He's not pushing back. That's a different kind of distance, and it's harder to fix because it doesn't force confrontation. It just slowly empties the relationship out. And then there's the daughter. People might expect her to be the problem here, but she's not the one driving this dynamic. She's responding to what the parents built around her. She learned that when she struggles, the environment shifts to accommodate her. That's not her fault. That's what she was taught. But it's also not helping her in the long run, because instead of learning how to exist in situations where things don't go her way, she's been surrounded by adjustments that prevent that discomfort. That doesn't build resilience, it reinforces fragility. So now, every new social setback hits just as hard, if not harder, because she hasn't had consistent practice navigating those feelings without the entire system bending. So now you've got one kid who learned his feelings won't be prioritized, and another who learned the world should soften when she's struggling. That's a setup that creates tension no matter how you look at it. The father being on the same page doesn't help either. It actually removes any internal balance in the household. There's no second perspective moderating decisions. No one is stepping in and saying, "We're overcorrecting." It's a unified front, which might feel stable to the parents, but to the son, it just means there's nowhere to go with his frustration. No alternative voice, no one to align with, so he stopped trying. The most telling moment isn't the Halloween situation. It's the smaller one afterwards, where the mother hesitates for a second and then still asks him to cancel again. That's the real pattern. Even when she knows what it looks like, even when she feels that hesitation, she still defaults to the same choice. That's a habit. That's not a one-time mistake. And until that changes at the decision level, not the explanation level, nothing else matters. Not therapy, not conversations, not promises. Because from the son's point of view, those are all just different ways of saying the same thing he's already heard: wait, adjust, and later. He doesn't believe in later anymore. That's why the ending of this situation isn't going to be some big blow up. It's going to be exactly what he said. He'll stay, follow the rules, keep things calm, and then leave. And when he does, the parents are going to feel blindsided, even though he's been very clear, because they're still focused on intention and reasoning, and he's focused on patterns. And patterns don't care what you meant.